Happiness through curiosity on the Ranveer Show. Do you want to move on to Russia-Ukraine? Because this seems like a situation that's almost over. Is it unfolding?
It is still unfolding, and it's a very dangerous flashpoint actually. So what's happening? Let's talk about that. So what's happening in Ukraine? There's not been much news coming out of Ukraine for quite a while. Here is the current situation. Russia is in control of about between a fifth and a quarter of the nation of Ukraine. Okay, it's a fluid situation. The lines on the front lines are changing here and there, but overall Russia has taken control of roughly a fifth to a fourth of the nation of Ukraine. Their forces are in the ascendancy. It's what's called the classic long war situation, long war scenario, in which both sides have said they are there and they know it is going to go on as long as it takes. The Russians are very patient. They have the Ukrainian armed forces have been devastated. They have essentially lost much of their young men. Then they had to resort to pressing middle-aged guys, 50-year-old, 55-year-old guys into battle. And then they have been forced to even press pregnant women into battle. That's been caught on camera. Such ladies surrendering to the Russians and that sort of thing. So Ukraine has been demographically devastated. The flower of youth has been destroyed, especially the men. That's where Ukraine is. So Ukraine is merely a proxy conflict. Ukraine is the cannon fodder that the West is using to hopefully try, from their perspective, to weaken Russia. It's not worked. Russia has gotten better as time has progressed, as they always do in historical conflict. Initially, they don't do very well. But then over time, they get better and better and better. The 1940s is a classic example of that. Initially, they were devastated by Operation Barbarossa, but then they started pushing back and they pushed all the way back to Berlin. So right now, Putin wants to wait this out. Okay, that's become very clear. If they want, they can flatten Ukraine tomorrow. They have enough firepower, air power and all that to completely flatten Ukraine tomorrow, but they don't want to do that. So eventually what's going to happen in Ukraine is going to be partitioned. Possibly along the Dnieper River, which flows through Kiev, or in whatever other way. Whenever it ends, this conflict, it may either be a frozen conflict or a negotiated settlement to the conflict, but it's going to end on Russia's terms. Now, here's the danger in Ukraine. Somebody gets the genius idea of putting NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. That's going to be a provocation that the Russians will not ignore, because Ukraine has been their red line. The Ukraine conflict started because NATO was pushing eastwards all the way inexorably towards Russia. And then Russia was faced with the prospect of having NATO forces and NATO nuclear weapons right on their border. And that's why the Ukraine conflict had to be triggered off by Putin. Starts with the Crimea conflict, Crimea war in 2014 was it? And then what happened in 2022. So Monsieur Macron, the French president, has been saying that we will send French forces to fight alongside the Ukrainian forces in Ukraine. Well, Mr. Putin is not going to just sit back and let that happen. So that's going to be a significant escalation if NATO forces have boots on the ground in Ukraine. Right now, it looks like they're already sending military personnel as so-called military advisors in Ukraine. So not in an official formal combat capability, but as advisors. That's how the Vietnam War started. Okay, if you go back to that period of time, the Americans were sending military personnel as so-called military advisors and political advisors to help the South Vietnam government against the North Vietnam government. The South was pro-US, the North was pro-China, and that's the deal. That's how the whole thing started. They seem to be doing something similar right now in Ukraine. So the next stage of escalation it's no longer Russia versus Ukraine, it's now Russia versus NATO. Now that again is not yet as bad a situation as you can imagine, because NATO is under NATO control, NATO command. It's not under US command. But if even that escalates further and you have Russia versus the US, well, now we're talking about World War III. What is World War III? People talk about World War III every day. From my perspective, World War III is when the top two powers come directly there is a direct confrontation between the top two powers, which is the US and Russia. People imagine China is the second most powerful nation. They simply are a powerful economy. But look at how many nuclear weapons they have. This much. Look at how many nuclear weapons the Russians have. They have enough nuclear weapons to annihilate the world. They have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. The Americans come second. So Russia is a very powerful defensive power. If they want, they can squash China tomorrow. If they want, they have that sort of firepower. The Chinese are nothing compared to Russia. Russia is far ahead of China in terms of hard power. So from my perspective, World War III means the US and Russia fight directly. And we don't want that to happen. And Ukraine is the one flashpoint in the world where you could have that happen. So that's why Ukraine, it may seem like nothing is happening there, but it's a very dangerous thing that's going on right now.
Hey, if you enjoyed this clip from the Ranveer Show, we've uploaded a ton of other clips related to a ton of other topics. So explore the channel because there's something for everyone.